Good afternoon, good evening. Welcome, everyone, no matter where you are in the world. Today we have a special. We're speaking to Mr. Richea Perry, who is a GRC professional. For those who don't know, that's governance, risk, and compliance. And today he's our special guest. We are Richie. I just want to say it is a privilege to have you on. I know you put out some good content and you provide some good education around cybersecurity and around the GRC. And so we wanted to get you on to kind of hear about your story. Again, welcome and thank you for being on our show today.
Uh, awesome. Well, first of all, thanks for taking the time to, have this conversation, for having reaching out to me. I really appreciate it, and I look forward to this wonderful conversation that we will no doubt be having as we go along. So I definitely appreciate the fact that you're actually having this conversation with me.
Good. So first, I just want to start off by sharing with the viewers a little bit of your background. You mentioned, so you are originally from Jamaica, and you recently moved to the UAE. But before that, you were in. It says here on I know on your LinkedIn that you were information systems manager, right? And that you did some network administration. So, kind of what led you into getting into governance, risk, and compliance? It seems such a heavy topic, you know what I mean? And so, what took you into that area of expertise?
Okay, great, Ash. Well, that's a great question. That's also very interesting. That in of itself has a story. Truth be told, prior to 2020, if you asked me what GRC was, I would be saying like, what does that actually mean? That's the question. I was actually introduced to GRC, but prior to GRC, my journey actually started from, if I could go right back even to my days of, high school, making that decision to go into college or university back then, I was always into architecture and IT. IT was like my second option. Back then, it wasn't, we weren't exposed a lot to, computers, technology back then. So my focus was on the technical side of architecture. So when I applied, the university that dealt with architecture, they did not reply or respond to me on time. However, the college that did the IT, that a new program, they were actually maybe hungry for new persons to be recruited in that program. So I was like instantly contacted, and that is how I was actually pulled into that program. It was a bachelor's, an associate degree started out in management information systems. So that is where my journey actually started, when I was then introduced to the various computer systems, the A plus certification part. I think back then it was IT Essentials, Cisco IT Essentials program that actually introduced me to networking, the fundamentals of networking, computers, connecting. And that is where my interest actually started, which actually led to various areas to where I am right now. So as it relates to my journey, it is somewhat, I spent a number of years, what actually drove me, my passion was, I was actually a curious person. So I normally would see, for example, the computer guys back then, I saw those persons as being geniuses. As you all know, watching these persons on television, I was like, whoa, I wish I could one day, pull a computer apart, install software programs. Those things look so, super cool. I was like, I consider myself like a pest to those guys at the computer lab. I was always like standing over their shoulders. They would try to get rid of me at times. I was asking questions. What was this? What was an hard drive? What was a floppy disk back then? So it sounds so funny talking about, floppy disk and all of these things and zip drives and all of these things. But they have a saying to say that if you stay around the barbershop long enough, you will eventually get an haircut. So that was where everything started for me, when I was then given the chance to put computer systems together. And then doing that program, and then having that practical aspect of that, being introduced to all these computer systems. So working with the theory as I go through my program, and then doing those practical hours inside those computer labs. Then I was then introduced to computer systems, then networking, and I actually landed my first job as a computer lab technician after completing my associate degree at that point in time.
Where did you complete your associates?
Well, my associate degree was completed at the Money College. That's in Senton at the time.
Okay. All
So
right.
that's where my journey actually started in
Okay.
terms of computing.
Okay. And so good deal. And many times, people have different backgrounds to come into to it, and so then you went into more of kind of a lab environment, or managing or being an administrator, right? And then from there, what was the next step?
Okay, great. So I've been spent a few years within that role, building the fundamental skills. And as I talk about fundamentals, that's so important when I actually, get into GRC, which I will eventually get to. That actually opened the door for me in terms of having those fundamentals of networking, computer system, operating system, or it is that all of these actually intertwine to actually provide the services of a management information system that organizations could actually utilize. So having completed that role, it so happened that I was always someone who was always, to a great extent, prepared. I was always walking around with my flash drive to various events with my resume back then. So whatever it is that I do, I will always
Looking for
document
opportunity.
for opportunities. So that's where my journey is. I'm always looking for opportunities.
Great.
So I would always walk around with my flash drive. It so happened that one day we went to, I think it was a seminar at the university that they would normally have. I think it was the Jamaica Computer Society back then. I think the name has changed now. And for some reason, one of my colleagues, someone who went to that function, do you have any jobs at your organization? I think she was the IT manager then, and she was like, oh yeah, we have an opening. Do you have a resume? And it was like, do you have a resume? And I was like, yes, here too. She said, she automatically took my flash drive, copied my resume to her computer system. And I don't remember exactly if it's the following day I was contacted by the HR at that institution to say they have an opportunity, would you like to come in for an interview? Did the first round, did well in that pass, that then I was then brought to the second round.
Yeah. So that's
That
when
was then.
preparation meets opportunity, huh?
Yes, exactly. So that was when all of the skills, those fundamental skills that I was actually building, now was the time that all of this now began to come to reality in terms of I was now thrown into a more wider environment in terms of the complexity of the environment, in terms of the systems. I was no longer working with just an educational environment, but you're now working in an organization dealing with, sales, revenue, production, all of these things happening. So it was a different scenario, different objectives. Certain things that you might have taken for granted, then the scope of how I operated, how I executed my duties, all of this actually started to change to a different level of maturity in what it is that I do. It was no longer, I would not say I was maybe at the surface then, but I still was at a point where I know how to deep dive to build my knowledge on top of what I knew back then as a computer lab technician. So I was now in the role of I think it was a system administrator or system analyst.
Right.
So I had that entire scope of dealing with the entire organization, branches, everything that has to do with servers.
Right. Yeah.
So that was when my skill set, installation of servers, late night, early mornings, all of these sacrifices, ensuring that all systems were updated, installed, configured. Working with Cisco switches and routers, all of these things were actually shown to me, and I had to take the time to say, all right, how do I go about learning this? Went off learning about CCNA, Network Plus, A Plus, whatever technology, whatever it is, backup systems, whatever it is that I had to do to build my skill. I was open to opportunities. So
great. So I'm going to take you back a little bit then. So in school, what was your favorite subject, right? What was your favorite subject in school? I know you said that you were interested in architecture, right? But sometimes I like to go back to the base. What was your favorite subject in school, and probably why?
Wow. I'm just trying to reflect a little bit to see what exactly was my, favorite. Well, I am somewhat, it's kind of difficult to maybe say right now. I somewhat tend to like subjects that were more practical, that I could relate to. That's one of the things. That's why I actually went into the technical area of, high school, into architecture. I like to relate to, the engineering, the technical drawing, these things that were more practical, that actually, well,
and it felt more tangible to you, probably more tangible that you can really touch.
Yes,
yeah.
I can put my hands on this.
Yeah.
That's the thing I like.
And all right. and there's a reason I'm asking this question. And then the other question I have, did you have any role models, any mentors growing up, and how might they have inspired you or guided you, on your journey?
That's a very good question. I really like that question because one of the challenges I had, have with in terms of having this conversation with a number of other persons
Mhm.
has to do with mentorship.
Yeah.
That is lacking for many persons. The truth is, I indirectly had persons, snippets of information to say X or Y, but I did not have a dedicated mentor per se as it relates to my career journey. I pretty
Mhm.
much had persons who maybe would say from time to time, you can do this or you could do this, or I might find myself around persons who are actually in maybe engineering or maybe the networking side of things or the software development side of things. I would maybe out of curiosity ask persons, what is it that you do? Or that is that, but I really did not have that level of, career mentorship. I pretty much search my way, find my own path,
Mhm.
try what worked, what did not work, until I eventually find my own passion as to what I really enjoy doing.
Okay. All right. Good deal. And the reason I ask these is that sometimes, we kind of look back and look for kind of like the clues, right? Which we might not realize were kind of guiding lights on the way, things on the path. And so that's a question that I have. And so even when it comes to that, like, for me, I realized that I had some mentors, even from like my aunts or my uncles, right? There were some people who might have been a little bit more entrepreneurial. There were some people who were in business, and so they gave me at least that, like you mentioned that word, curiosity, and that kind of spurred me on in different directions. And even although it was not directly to IT and networking and where I am now, it did kind of feed that fire. And many times I ask this question because sometimes there are people who might say, well, I didn't grow up in a family household who might have had other engineers or, other professionals, or maybe people didn't go to college. But I do realize that there are still people who are put around us that can plant those seeds in different ways that help us to become who we are today. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I believe that's also very important. As I've mentioned before, I might not have had someone who directly took
Yeah.
my hands and said, all right, go along this path, do X, do Y. But there were snippets, I would say snippets, pockets of persons
Yeah.
that would always be there at some point, some interval to say, try this option. Why don't you apply here? Why don't you do this program? Why don't you take this certification? So I would say there were actually snippets of persons who were quite influential in my life. Based on what you have actually just mentioned a while ago. So
Okay.
I might not have had that direct mentorship, but there were actually persons around within my journey who actually had that level of value to where I am right now.
So now that you've come through different stages, uh, if you look back now, or if there's someone who is kind of starting out now, um, what is it about GRC, or maybe IT in general, that what would you say to them as a reason to get into GRC? Is it a good opportunity for folks to take interest in?
Well, I would say yes. And if I was maybe a doctor, I would say yes. If I was an engineer, I would say yes. And the reason is that it all depends. It
Yeah.
varies. There are many variables involved in all of this. But the fact is that I I would say that before you actually get into a particular career path,
Mm.
or try to jump into something, try to take time to evaluate, to assess where you're at. And when I say assess, I'm talking about looking at your age, very important. There are some things that there are certain things in my life, that I did back then that I would not try to maybe go into right now. Based on the
Okay.
fact that there are biological reasons, your brain begins to work a certain way. And
Mm.
that's why I've actually gone into the GRC aspect of things. And here's the reason why. I spent a number of years, you name it, running the cables, going under the decks, going on the floors, installing the Wi-Fi, pulling apart things, hundreds, thousands of hours spent on installation of various applications,
Yeah.
nights. I got to a point where my system was like, no, this is it. So I reached a point whereby it's almost like there was no more passion for doing certain things.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I reached a point whereby so having completed system administration, network administration, the opportunity led itself into becoming a systems, an information systems manager. So I'm actually moving up now to that part of management, supervision, managing risk, managing other persons working in other departments. So that level of leadership, that level of responsibilities, working with persons. So I recognize that there was something very unique along this path, starting from working as a lab technician. I recognize that I built relationships very well with persons, regardless of the level at which they are.
Yeah.
I always was someone in any organization that I could call anyone to say, look, I have this to do. And it was like, no worries. So that was one of my key things.
Yeah.
So I recognize that I work with people well in terms of getting things done, moving the organization forward. So I would say that GRC, governance, risk, and compliance, is at a I'm trying to be careful in terms of saying that this is something that is at a management or a managerial level, because the fact is that depending on your ability to apply yourself to learn, then you can always do anything. So that's the key thing. But when it comes down to governance, risk, and compliance, I think it's a very mature role. Organizations are now placing the responsibility of compliance, managing risk. So it's governance, risk, compliance, all of these, you have to have those fundamental understanding. For example, as it has to do with maybe compliance, say you have to be compliant with a ISO 27001 standard, it involves a number of controls that organizations need to employ. So if you do not have that critical understanding of what controls are, understand the fundamentals of security, then trying to get into GRC without those appreciation doesn't really align itself well. So I would not say that GRC is a role that is for everyone. So, but I believe having a good technical understanding of those fundamental principles makes you a better GRC professional in terms of that alignment.
All right. So I have two more questions on this vein. And then I'm going to get into more GRC. A question I have here is for our viewers, how has your definition of success changed over time, right? And what does success mean to you now? And this question is a more holistic question, right? Many times, yes, you're a professional in a particular area, but listen, we don't live our life kind of in a vacuum, right? There are different things that happen that influence us, etc. Right? There are different levels of maturity that that occur as we grow and we experience different things. And so many times I ask this question because sometimes people believe that once I start here, they think that there's a straight line. And so sometimes there's a zigzag and there's, up the hill and down in the gully and etc. And so that's the background for this question. So how has success or that definition of what you consider to be success change for you over time?
Well, I mean, that's a very good question. Rightly said. I mean, success is a zigzag. It's never straight. Well, at least for me, I don't know about you or other persons, but I know for sure as it relates to success. And I mean, when persons talk about success, for many persons, it's all about, I mean, achieving maybe financially or reaching at the top of maybe the career success, a lot of wherever you are. But looking back at where I am right now, success is that fulfillment of being able to add value to a person's life, based on the fact that there were many persons who poured into my life. And I'm talking holistically.
Yeah.
In terms of my overall development.
Yeah.
So at various verticals, intervals within my life, many persons were poured in various areas. So I would say success is being able to pour back into other person's life based on what they have actually done for me over these past years. So the fact that I'm actually at a level now where I'm able to be a mentor to someone, to guide someone, to say, look, these are the things that you can do. Being able to introduce someone to my circles of friends so that doors and opportunities can be open. It's what actually, it's more fulfilling to me right now than having maybe 15, 20 certifications or working at the most executive job role.
Right.
That's one of the most fulfilling things for me, being able to have that impact on another person's life, adding value to a person's life daily, knowing that as a result of something that I might have actually assisted those individuals with, they are better off where they are now as a result of what I have done, I mean, towards their career journey. So I would say in a nutshell.
Okay. And so is there something that you would say that you are particularly proud of now in your life, but maybe you don't get a chance to talk about? We're not a monolith, right? So yes, you are the GRC professional, but what is it that people might not know out there that you might want to state that you're particularly proud of?
Wow, that's a very good question. I mean, I haven't really taken that time to really maybe
Okay.
think about such a question. Well, that's a very good question. What is it? I'm just trying to see the best way to actually.
Mhm.
I would say that as I mentioned earlier before, I think I am someone who, outside of, I mean, computers, cybersecurity, I mean, technology,
Yeah.
I'm someone who gets along well with persons,
Mhm.
gets along well with various people, various nationalities, various, I mean, countries. So I think that this ability, because at the end of the day, you have the technology, you have the system, but without human intervention, without people,
Yeah.
none of this makes sense.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
outside of all of this is one of my strong points, being able to, I think, sit with a board of management, I mean, executives, first, various people from all over the world, wherever you are, and be able to build together, work together to get various tasks done.
Okay.
So I think that is something I think that is an ability that I maybe not talk about or post about or communicate a lot about, that I think I have that ability.
No, and that's super important. I'm glad that you mentioned that. Basically you're stating the human connection, and as you've answered different questions here in this conversation, you talked about people who've poured into you, how it means a lot to you to be able to contribute to others. You've talked about how mentorship and being able to provide mentorship to those, especially you might not have had that direct mentorship, and so that's part of it. And just kind of because of your diversity of roles, you get to deal with people from from what do you call it, from the mailroom all the way to the boardroom, and
Yes.
so so it sounds like that thread of the human connection and applying value there is something that is seriously something that you are proud of, and that is also a deep skill set for you.
Yes, it is. That's super, super important. Talking about those soft skills,
Yeah.
super important. I always say to people that no matter how smart you are, how much of a genius you are, unless you are able to break things down, simplify things, communicate, being able to build relationships, your business, your company, your organization, institution will never move forward. That's where it boils down for me.
All right. And last on the professional slash personal, the question I have is, how do you balance your personal and professional life, right? What strategies do you see work for you? You know, uh, we mentioned IT. So my background was networking. So when you said, about running cable, I didn't have to run cables, but I was on call many times. Anytime you're doing changes, it's overnight. You know what I mean? And so the good thing is I love the flexibility of being a network engineer. But when you're on, there were sometimes that we had Cisco TAC issues, and we could be up for a full 48 hours, whatever, until it gets done. You know what I mean? So, and so it's changed for me over the time. Have kids, you don't have kids, to having kids, to being married, all the other things that come with life. So how do you balance your personal and professional life now?
That's very important. That's what's very challenging. I mean, having to deal with all of these alerts. And when I talk about alerts, I'm talking about alerts from devices versus alerts from first people. So
Yeah, yeah.
no, I had to seriously. It still a challenge, but I think I somewhat have this to a better level of, I mean, managing all these activities, taking time to prioritize, looking at my values, looking at where I am, looking at my goals, my objectives in life. So I have to seriously prioritize, I mean, what is important, taking a holistic approach, thinking about my health. I mean, I'm talking about, I mean, spiritual health, physical health,
Yeah.
mental health, name it. All of these elements into focus, prioritizing very importantly. So by doing this, I'm able to see if I have X amount of alerts, then I do not need to be checking all of these things. I do not. So, for example, I try to coming on to my weekends, I've actually started developing that discipline that once it gets to, for example, Friday at a certain time, that's it for gadgets. That's it for, responding to LinkedIn posts and all of these things. I try my best to have that space of sitting down, relaxing, maybe reading a book, talking to, family, friends, getting myself that balance, knowing at the end of the day, you have to think about what is most important in your life. So you have to have that strong value system that leads you back to what is fundamental, the important things of life. So that is what I used to guide, where I am right now in terms of managing my time, my activities, all of the various, noise, as they would say.
Okay. All right. Is there anything else that you want to tell me about Richie? Anything else that you want to share?
Well, one of the things I am really passionate about in terms of working with organizations, taking that time to help organizations to build their various GRC programs, their cybersecurity programs, to actually help them to operate as safely and as securely as best as possible. That's where my passion is right now. Working with the various teams, executives, management, sitting down, having those conversations, moving from conversations into practical implementation, and to actually see things happening, see organizations progressing. Having those incident response plan in place, those business continuity plans. So that's where my passion is.
Okay, great. All right. Well, thank you, Richie. I appreciate the time. It's coming up on the hour, but so I don't want to take any more of your time, but I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, to hear more about GRC, cybersecurity, but to find out about you, the man, the person. Again, you brought up a great point that regardless of all these, cybersecurity and technology is changing all day long. And so many times we put a lot of our mindset around, learning new skill set, learning new certifications, etc. But one of the biggest assets that you can have is how do you forge connections? How do you forge human connections, right? And so how do you have those conversations? And so I really appreciate you taking that time for us to develop this connection and to have this conversation.
Sure, it was indeed a pleasure. And I look forward to, many more conversations like this. It's all about, as you have rightly said, maintaining and building connections. That's one of the things, the advice that I would always give back to share with persons who really want to take their career forward, not just for cybersecurity, but your overall life.
Yeah.
Build strong relationships.
Great. Thank you.